because in due season we'll reap if we faint not. We cannot. I looked at this thing in so many different aspects and so many different reasons. I said, what make us think that enemy won't use people that's close to us to fight us when Joseph's own brothers plotted to kill him? So much so, he didn't do anything. So get this out of your head that, oh, I didn't do anything to him, so why they hate me? He was just born with favor. And because the favor of God rested on his life, they hated him. They hated, not only did they do that, they grieved with the man. The enemy will show up and act like he's grieving with you. He'll act like they with you. Come hell or hot water, I'm there. But guess what? You cannot allow this trick of the enemy to make you lose focus on what's important. One thing about Joseph, he knew who he was. He knew that the dreams that God gave him, even if nobody else seen it. I know what God has showed me. I know what God has spoken. And when God has spoken a word to you, if nobody else understands it, he didn't give the word to them. He gave it to you. You don't have to have people to trust the vision that God has purposed in your life. He gave the vision to you for a reason. If he wanted them to dream, he'd have gave them the dream. It ain't for you to understand. Whether you believe it or not, it's going to happen because God spoke it. Serve. Maybe you didn't serve right. Go serve the way that he told you to serve. Maybe revisit that situation that we may have stewarded incorrectly. Be active while you wait. Joseph didn't give up and die in the pit. He didn't start planning his death. He didn't write no farewell letters. He didn't do that. He trusts God even in a pit, even in a dark season. There was no water there. There was no sign of life. But I know a man that can do all things but fail. And God didn't bring me here to leave me. And Joseph knew that I can't die before I fulfill my purpose. God gave me a dream and a vision, and I know I can't die in this pit. And even after he got out of the pit and he went into the house, he still didn't die there. He even got set up even in there because he wouldn't touch the woman. She began to plot up and lie. Because I won't touch you. You gonna lie on me? But God will always uphold your character. And he will always speak for you. He will always go before you. He will always be behind you and right beside you. Because one thing about it, when the favor of God rests on your life, I don't care what a devil in hell tried to do. Favor will always reign over you when you are chosen and you are appointed by God. Be active. Make sure you're waiting correctly. Don't wait with attitude. I thought I was done with this by now. And right before God gave me this message, I had to go through a season. Everything looked like the ball was rolling. I was happy-go-lucky, y'all. I was like, yeah, I'm going to be here. I don't mind waiting. I'm going to wait. Take your time. And then God said, I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you that. Now get back in the waiting room. I could have easily said, you know what, God, I'm sick of this. What happens when waiting comes to years? What happens when weeks turn to months? Can you still trust God? Can you still serve even when you don't understand? You got to make sure you're waiting correctly. Make sure you're using this time wisely. Get closer to him. Maybe waiting means God is drawing something out of you. Maybe God is pulling something out of you in this waiting room. Make sure that your plans and the things that you have are aligned with God's purpose. Wait with your mouth closed and your knees bent. Make sure your heart is open. So even if God want to rewrite something in the waiting room, you're able to be open and receptive. Biblical examples of ways to wait and people who waited. Abraham waited 25 years for a son. Joseph waited from the pit to the palace. That was 13 years of waiting. How many ever been in a waiting room? How many ever had to go to the doctor or to the emergency room? Y'all, I remember some years ago, I had my first real true experience in a waiting room. You know, when I was pregnant, y'all, I was in the waiting room every week because I just needed them to get it better. Brian would say, Jen, you sure you need to go to the, yes, don't ask me that, just take me. You know, the waiting room became my second home. And But God began to show me, that was petty. Yeah, you got it. It was easy to wait then. But when you show enough in pain, that waiting room can feel like torture. About 10 years ago, maybe longer than that, I'm going to say about 16 years ago, my husband and I conceived our first baby. And for whatever reason, my husband and I was excited. A couple people that knew my mother-in-law and my mom, they were excited, but I couldn't get excited because just like God had showed Joseph a dream, God showed me a dream, and he showed me a dream that this baby wasn't going to make it. And my husband was driving a motorcycle, and I was sitting behind him on the motorcycle, and we were driving on this motorcycle, and when I looked down at my stomach, I just seen blood everywhere. There was no wreck. There was no accident. It was just blood. And I was just screaming, no, God, not my baby, not my baby, not my baby. And so I woke up and I told my husband, I said, don't tell anybody that we're pregnant. He said, why? I said, just don't. I didn't tell him. God had already showed me that we were going to lose the baby. I just told him, don't tell anybody. Didn't know how. So I thought I could, because God showed me, I was like, maybe I can prevent it. So I listened to all the, people saying, don't reach over your head and don't do this. And I'm like, surely if God gave me the child, he ain't going to take it from me like that. Maybe it was because I did something wrong. So I began to watch how I moved and how I did this. And come to find out, one day I felt the worst pain of my life. I didn't know what was going on, and I began to have faint spells where I would just fall out. And because I'm a very playful person, my husband thought I was just picking at him and playing. And I remember waking up, and I began to tell my husband, I said, take me to the emergency room. I couldn't walk, couldn't talk. I fainted again. And when I woke up again, I was in the emergency room. And I didn't tell my husband I felt like I was going to die. I just knew, and I did die. And I knew that that was my end. As I sat in the waiting room, I was in and out, and I couldn't walk. They rolled me in a wheelchair. And I began to pray, and I began to make my peace with God. And I began to tell God, God, if you take me, I'm ready. I live right. I try to treat people right. If you take me, I'm ready. As I sat in the waiting room, I thought that this was my last resort. They began to call me back, and I couldn't see anything, couldn't talk, but I could hear. And I began to hear them read the disclaimers and disclosures to my husband and tell him that they had to do emergency surgery and that there was a 50-50 chance that I wouldn't make it. I began to feel the suture scissors cut my clothes off me. I still remember the dress that I had on. And as I began to get in the room, the operating room, I seen this light that I cannot even explain. And I began to see my soul descend from my body. And I woke up again right before I seen the light and seen my soul descend. I looked at my husband and I told him, I said, if he take me, I'm ready. And I began to hear him count down. But I began to, while I couldn't speak, and I could hear, but I couldn't say anything. That's why you got to be careful who you take in the waiting room with you. Because everybody don't have the power to speak life. Everybody don't have the power to speak to your future. Everybody don't have the power to speak to death and tell death to behave. You got to be careful who you take in the waiting room with you. And I began to feel my husband's hand, and I began to feel the prayers that he was praying. And as I began to wake up in the recovery room, there was a nurse that stood over me, and she said, baby, I don't know why you're here, but we lost you several times. She said, you have a purpose. She said, whatever it is, you better hurry up and find it. And I began to look up towards heaven, and I still couldn't speak, but tears began to roll down my eyes. And I began to look up towards heaven and say, God, you did it again. You didn't let me die in the waiting room. You didn't let the waiting room be my end story. So I know what the waiting room felt like. I know what it feels like. I know it's an area of uncertainty. I know it's an area where you got to trust other people to speak your faith. I know it's an area where you got to trust other people to take care of you. And you got to trust this step, and you got to trust this step. And every step you take, you got to trust somebody that's greater than yourself. I know what the waiting room feel like. But God has come to say this morning, don't die there. That's not your end goal. That's not your end resort. It doesn't mean that this is the end, but it represents a season before your promise. It's the season right before you get to that back. It's the season right before the doctors say everything is going to be okay, that this is a minor issue. Although it feels major and it feels like you're going to die, you're not going to die here. Joseph waited. He waited in the pit. He waited in the prison. He waited in the palace. But God prevailed. And I'm here to let you know that your waiting room season is just about over. Don't let it kill your faith. Don't let it kill your dream. Don't let it kill that waiting room season. Is just about over. Don't feel despair. Wait with correction. Wait with knowing that everything's going to be okay. It's just about over. You can't die there. Right before you give up, God is going to call your name. And he's going to say, come here. I know it's been a rough season. I know that you ought to just begin to clap and give God the praise. And let the enemy know today that I'm not going to die in the waiting room. Y'all continue to pray for me.
Amen. Come on, clap your hands again for that wonderful word. Amen, amen. Come on, let's stand to our feet as we get